Welcome to Asian America, the leading public television program dedicated to Asian American issues and nationally syndicated on PBS television. For this segment of Asian America, I'm Al Leach. Our topic today is myopia among Asian American children. My guests today are Rebecca Wong, a teacher of Chinese students, Dr. Ivan Lee, an optometrist and eye care professionals in Hamilton, New Jersey, and Professor Young Mi Cho, Associate Professor of Asian Languages and Cultures at Rutgers University. Welcome. Dr. Lee, let me start with you and ask you, what is myopia, if you could define that?
Sure. I have a model here just to show you what myopia is, but basically when you look at an object, it goes through the cornea, through the lens, and in order for you to see clearly, it should focus right on the retina. But what happens in myopia, as the light travels through the system, whether it be the length of the eye is too long or this power of the front layer is too strong, the light not only focuses right in the back, the light travels and focuses short of the retina, right at this point, or sometimes they call it short-sightedness.
How much of an issue is myopia among Asian children?
Well, myopia is actually becoming an epidemic in a lot of Asian countries. If you'd like to know the prevalence, in Taiwan about 84% of the population is myopic. In Korea and China, it's about 60%. In the United States, it's only about 25%.
Why is that in the States it's only 25%?
There's different cultures, and we're finding that it has a lot to do with environmental factors. The study habits and the school systems in Asian countries and the values of some of the Asian cultures really strongly enforce education, and the kids do a lot of schoolwork.
What age does this start with at kids? Are they 3 years old, 5 years old?
It can start as young as, myopia can start in an infant.
And long term, what are the complications that come about? The
earlier it starts, the higher your final myopic outcome is going to be. But the implications, if it becomes an epidemic and the higher the prescription becomes, you're really increasing your chance of medical problems such as glaucoma and retinal problems.
I see. And how do you treat myopia?
Myopia, you can treat it with glasses. There's contact lenses, and there's LASIK surgery. Mm-hmm. But majority of our kids today are just wearing single vision glasses. There are new preliminary research that is going on right now that shows that something called orthokeratology lenses, or retainer lenses that are worn in the evening time, the child sleeps with the lens. And while they sleep, the retainer lenses are actually changing the shape or molding the cornea. And the children remove their lenses in the morning, and they actually have clear vision throughout the entire day. But what the research is now demonstrating, it possibly can slow down the progression of myopia. So there's millions of dollars are going towards that form of myopia control, and it's very promising.
Is there a debate that it's genetic, or that it's a disease, or it's a condition, versus that it's caused by cultural and environmental issues?
In the past, they pretty much thought it was a genetic component. Okay, but the trend now, and researchers are finding that it's maybe as little as 5% of myopia is caused by a genetic component, which leaves the rest due to the environment. Okay, and we're starting to see again in the Asian cultures, Taiwan, Singapore, that with the amount of schooling and competition with the schooling, their myopia rates are extremely high, and we're attributing that a lot to do with the near work, video games, a lot of television, because computer work is increasing in amount. 54 million Americans, children, now have access to computers right in their own home.
But it is among many children of many different descents, nationalities. So, Dr. Cho, how would you explain why among Asian children, perhaps, it might be more of an issue than other kids from other nationalities?
I can talk about sort of the education obsession in East Asian countries. And I'm a specialist in Korean culture, but if I can sort of venture out of that a little bit and talk about, what happens in Taiwan and Singapore and Japan, there's sort of similar values are shared. The education fever is such that in South Korea, national college entrance exam day is a special day where grown-ups go to work later so that students can go to the exam site on time, and there are police cars everywhere. So it has a special obsession with that. And a couple of weeks ago, I read a newspaper article about cyber terrorism, which involves college applicants blocking some of the sites of the desired colleges. So 29 students are going to be prosecuted for that. So I don't think it's all bad, but there is that clearly an obsession about going to best schools, and your life is determined by grades. So that pressure is there. As long as it's there, it involves sometimes 10 to 15 hours of schoolwork, homework a day for anywhere from elementary school to high school.
So you're seeing this in large part among Asian communities?
That's duplicated in Asian communities in the United States as well.
It is, okay. And, excuse me, and what is the cultural implication of that? I mean, what can be done about that?
Well, that's a very difficult question because there are positive sides. So if you look at the history of the past 50 years of Korea, Japan, and Taiwan and other countries, they had a rapid breakneck speed of modernization. So probably about less than 20% illiteracy at the end of the Second World War. Now we're talking about almost 99% literacy. So the education was successful. But then the downside is that everybody's obsessed with that to the extent that, other parts of your life will be suffered. Social life and myopia might be one of the bad consequences of that.
I see. Now, Rebecca Wong, you are a homeschool teacher.
Yes.
And you have 2 children that you have decided to teach from home.
Yes.
Why did you do that, make that decision?
Actually, one of the reasons, there are many reasons. One of the reasons is that when we come to America, I found the educational system in America is much more relaxed, and it's focused much more on individual fulfillment. But as my kids grow, I have an 11-year-old and 13-year-old. And as they're moving towards junior high, I see that even though their school requirement is not as demanding, it's not nearly as demanding as, say, their cousins in China are facing. But because we're part of the Asian community in America, even after school, they have to, besides schoolwork, they have to do a lot of after-school enrichment. For example, like they have advanced math, they have Kuma, they have all kinds of, just sort of because they're not challenged enough at school. So in order to, so from my perspective, I want them to utilize their daytime better than just say going to school and then not really being challenged and not really having a very productive day, and then come home, have to start school all over. Before I homeschool them, their typical day would go to school, and when they come back, finish their homework in half hour maybe, and then they would start another series of work. But now I found that when it's 5 o'clock, they're done, and they have a challenge day. That's my, from my perspective, I think I give them more space, more time, so that hopefully they don't spend 10 and 12 hours studying every day.
Much of the educational experience for children as well is socialization, is studying and learning with other children, building friendships, problem solving, sharing opinions, things of that nature. How do folks who homeschool children help address the other issues?
That's actually a myth. Most people who don't know about homeschool well enough would think socialization is the #1 problem that we're going to encounter. But actually, if you look at the school-age children, their social circle is primarily within their peers. And if you take that into any working environment, say, or even to a college or whatever, you really have to develop the social skill, not only with your peers, but also with like your elder, with your coworker that could be much older than you or could be younger to you. So from that point, homeschool kids actually have the opportunity to meet with a lot more. You know, they meet with, like my kids, they babysit for my friends' kids, like during the day sometimes. And I see my son turning, a 13-year-old boy turning from somebody who don't even want to talk to his sister to somebody who are loving even with a 2-year-old. So from that, I think that's a huge step towards socialization, other than just hanging around with his peers.
In terms of preparing children for college and higher education from a homeschool experience, do we see any of that in countries outside the United States, of a greater preponderance of homeschooling versus being in the system?
In East Asian countries that I know of, homeschooling is non-existent. So it's a formal education heavily on formal schools. However, recently there have been some alternative schools whose primary goals are not preparing the kids for college. So there is that minor movement. Still, but for majority of parents and children, the obsession is going to the best of schools. And there, schools are ranked from 1 to 200, and all the grades of each student will be registered, so you know out of the pool of a certain number of candidates where you rank. So it's a extremely harsh system in a way, because everything is so competitive.
The competition is fierce in these Asian countries. In Taiwan, I know my family, I have a lot of cousins that attend the universities and the schools in Taiwan, and they study constantly, average of about 10 hours a day. The competition is really fierce, and the parents demand excellence from their children.
How much of an issue then is this in the States? Because we've been very fortunate here in that we've been a relatively isolated country for many years, and now that with the global economy, there's a lot in the news that the American students' educational standards are lax. They're not as competitive as they are in other countries, particularly in Asian countries. What are some of the things that you think that, is there a different shift and change in terms of attitudes towards education that we need to embrace here, and also in terms of, is it the parents where you start? Is it the schools that you start? Do you start with the students? Where do you put the emphasis in terms of really pushing them harder?
I think from our background, you have to understand we are the first generation immigrants. The only reason we can be here and enjoy a relatively successful life here in the States is because of our education. So we put a lot of faith in, coming from that direction, we put a lot of faith in that. And same thing, that's why we demand that from our children. So I don't, like you said, the American student, the school system is comparatively, it's less demanding, and maybe it's not even to the point, it's not even preparing our children well. So that's why I think it's very common in Asian community that we feel that we feel compelled to do something on our own, sort of just make sure that they still have that competitive edge we had.
Well, you may have different expectations for your children.
Yes, and believe me, our expectation for our children compared to, say, my sisters and brother, they are still in China. Compared to their expectation for their kids, it's already very much adjusted. Because I do like a lot of culture things from American culture. You know, you're supposed to express yourself. You're supposed to pursue your own dream and stuff like that. I think that's good. But on the other hand, I also believe that you should achieve the potential that you can have. You should bring out that includes academic excellence.
The issue of myopia, we've talked a lot about studying, competition, and some of the perhaps medical effects that, or physical effects that you can have by the intensity of really studying very hard. Some of that is certainly social and cultural. Here in the States, we have an incidence you mentioned of 25%. Is that within Asian American populations?
No,
is that across the board?
I don't really have a prevalence of just Asian American. It's across the board, all nationalities in the United States.
And would you expect to see a greater preponderance of myopia and other perhaps physical ailments affecting children with higher burdens and competitive pressures placed upon them?
Definitely. I think the percentages probably rank in the 60 or 70% of Asian Americans probably wear glasses at this point.
I see. And wearing glasses, I mean, we all hate doing that as children, but because it affects our abilities to play sports. Sometimes other students are a little too honest about how we look with glasses. Is that an issue? Is it seen as a stigma or an issue for children of Asian American descent?
Somewhat. It sort of plays on that Asian prototype, whatever stereotypes that, kids could make fun of you more if you're Asian and have glasses on. So I have two sons, and both of them started with glasses, and soon enough they said, I want to switch to contact lenses. And I was also very worried about the rapid progression of myopia as they undergo the growth spurt. So we tried this and that, and once in California we tried orthocare, and sort of you as parents, you do your best to make them, especially boys, they really have to play sports. And I started wearing my glasses when I was in high school, and that was a rare thing then. So, and then people used to make fun of me as four eyes. We have that expression in Korea, says, people with glasses and four eyes.
I find that the children, it's more for the cosmetic reason. But for the adults, they come into our office really for the medical issues. They're really worried about progression of myopia.
I see.
So, on one hand, children, it's more cosmetic, but it's definitely a medical issue.
Issues of self-esteem or things that there are. I see. So that can obviously impede also their ability to learn to some extent as well, socially. Why should parents here in the United States be concerned about myopia? And you mentioned earlier that it's of epidemic proportion, that it's affecting children at a much younger age. What might we see 10 years down the road?
Again, it could be a medical issue in the future. The higher the myopia, the more incidence of medical problems like retinal problems. But is it a social issue? It's probably a social issue also.
So genetics, culture, social, environmental, we're leaning more towards the latter than the former.
That's right.
Okay. What can be done? What do you do? How do you address this? If it's a medical issue, you see a doctor, and it can be treated, it cannot be cured. Or can it be cured?
It cannot be cured at this time. Millions of dollars are going into treatments for myopia. And the newest preliminary results with orthokeratology lenses, it's going into that aspect of treatment. But at this point, there's something that we tell all of our patients is to have something called visual hygiene. The kids have to have certain exercises to do. Instead of reading with their head down or the book too close, they have to hold the material at least 14 inches away. If they're going to read for a prolonged period of time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, the kids sometimes don't stop. But we're asking them to stop, not for 10 minutes, you work 20 minutes and stop for 10 minutes, but it's more like 20 minutes and maybe you stop for 30 seconds. You walk around or you just look around for 30 seconds. We can eliminate probably the amount of video games that the kids play nowadays and probably a little bit less television. And if you eliminate a lot of that, their outdoor activities will increase also.
You limit it to how many hours a day or a week?
For
the computers and video games or television?
See, that's a difficult question because we want our children to do well in school. We want them to compete. We want them to study. I never tell our patients, don't study, don't do your close work. But if you follow the visual hygiene techniques, it could limit the amount of myopia. It's not in our Asian nature to say, stop studying. In
terms of socially and environmentally, in terms of what can be done, Professor Cho and Rebecca Wang, any thoughts on that?
I think as a parent, okay, well, actually, I also run a Chinese class out of my house, and all my students wears glasses. So when Dr. Lee said Asian American community, the rate is probably 60%, I think it's higher because just from my experience, and both my children do. So I think as a parent, I think we have to, first of all, to be educated, to know what kind of hygiene that we should, at least if you know it, and then try to follow it. I know myself, I didn't know about it until I went to the doctor and find out my kids already developed this, because for me, I always accepted as a part of my life. I know since everybody else wears glasses, I know my kids probably will. So I sort of accepted that as a part of my life. But I think being educated first is definitely the first step, and then you just have to be disciplined, sort of, to remind your children constantly, and also just to deliberately make an effort to get them up, not just stick their nose to books all day long. I think that consciousness will make a big difference.
What can the schools do? What should they do?
Well, let's see. First of all, one has to strike a really fine balance, being competitive and providing a top quality education to students on the one hand, and on the other hand, being sort of raise them into a well-balanced people. So probably Asian culture is too much obsessed, especially first generation, the immigrants are too much obsessed with the first, and they're not paying enough attention to the latter. Mm-hmm. And if they sort of, I think over time, by second, third generation, people relax. So it will take, the time will take care of it somewhat, but then by that time your eyes will be bad, so it's not a good consequence. So follow the doctor's advice.
I have a funny story of how I see Asian parents pushing their children. I heard an interview of this director, M. Night Shyamalan.
Yes.
Do you know who he is?
Yes.
He directed
Village.
Sixth Sense and Stuart Little. And he was talking about a conversation that he had with his parents. After he made these blockbuster films, he went to his parents and showed all the magazines that he was on. He was on Newsweek, he was on U.S. News, and do you know what his dad said? It's like, why aren't you in Time magazine?
So the next step.
It's really, although that's exaggerated or far-fetched, I laugh because I do see some truth to that, because I see the Asian parents really pushing their children to this amount of excellence, and the kids really have to perform, and in that case they're studying 10, 12 hours a day.
Are the kids pushing back at all?
Many instances
here in the
that.
States, more so than in Asia, or?
Definitely. I think it's especially when they reach adolescence, all of a sudden they have this culture crash, because when you reach, like, say, when they become a teenager, all of a sudden the peers have much more influence on them than the family. And when they go out, all of a sudden they say, how come my American classmates are not like my son, for once, he told me, he said he on the school bus, he saw somebody, it's the report card day, and he's worrying about his 1B plus or A minus or something. He knows he's going to get a hard time on that. But he said his classmates say, oh, I got everything on C or B, you know, my family will be so happy. And then he just come back and say, why is that? You know, like, why do you demand me to, for me, I try to, a lot of time I try to change my own mindset, try to talk to him. I firmly believe that any kids should reach their full potential.
Okay, we just have a minute left. Let me ask, what informational resources are available for viewers if they want more information on myopia and how it affects Asian children?
It's not exactly on myopia, but I have a recommendation for a book called Education Fever that details the 50 years of Korean education obsession. It's an excellent book.
Thank you for watching this segment of Asian America on myopia and Asian children. I'd like to thank my guests, Rebecca Wang, Dr. Ivan Lee, Professor Cho. For Asian America, I'm Al Leach.
If you have any comments or suggestions, please write to Asian America, care of WNYU-TV, 112 Tillery Street, Brooklyn, New York, 11201, or visit our website at www.asianamerica.com.